Thank you for joining my webinar. Today we are going to talk about maneuvering in equal positions if you're playing for a win. Because if you're playing for a draw, it's enough just to offer a draw. However, if you play for a win, you have to improve your pieces. Okay, let me check if the webinar is streaming on both platforms. Here it works. I stream on both platforms, on Twitch and YouTube as well. Please let me know, guys, about the sound and video quality, if everything is okay and you can successfully hear me. Okay, so several people joined already. Okay, 4K joined, perfect. Is the sound and video okay? Please let me know. And for those who attend the webinar for the first time, guys, could you please introduce yourself? Tell me which country are you from and what's your rating. It can be either FIDE ELO or just national rating or chess.com ELO. Okay, unfortunately there was no email reminder this week, and let me tell you this sad story. Okay, yeah, hi ZX Chess. What's your ELO? It can be either a chess.com rating. Oh, you speak Russian? Yes. So why I'm asking for rating, it's just I want to realize, should I explain in details, or maybe I just should explain some complicated things without paying attention to the details, and if you can imagine everything in your mind, or if you need everything well explained. So okay, so we have several YouTube viewers. Okay, perfect. So people are joining. Well, guys, sorry about the email, because can you imagine it? Because you know I'm Russian and I conduct webinars from Russia. However, I have almost nobody who speaks Russian among my students. No, just, yeah, a few students, but there is nobody among those who attend the webinar. And actually, MailChimp, the program that, no, the software which allowed me to send my emails with reminders through my mailing list, closed my account. So, and I lost the access to my database, I mean to my mailing list. So that's why I couldn't use another service to send these emails, which is pretty bad, because so who struggled as the result of their sanctions? Me, yes, I don't want to conduct the webinars for 1 or 2 people. Usually it should be at least 10, maybe 10. So if there are, I will even if there are 3 people. But if it's much more, I'm more excited and I'm better prepared for the webinar. So, and of course, my American and European students didn't receive anything, and that's why we just see 4 viewers on Twitch and 3 on YouTube, unfortunately. Anyway, so that was a bad thing and a sad story. What news I have? So first of all, I would like to no, it's too early to say to present, but I would like to let you know that I am almost over with my new course, which is devoted to how to play Poulsen variation. So Poulsen Sicilian. Let me just quickly show what do I mean. I'm sure you see the screen. So I'm talking about this Sicilian: e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes d4, and knight takes d4. And you know, my favorite opening is Can Sicilian with a6, but if you want to extend your opening repertoire, you can also play knight c6 here, which is a different opening. It can be called either Poulsen or Taimanov variation of Sicilian defense. And so I created a course devoted to these positions. This opening is really so sharp, so I kindly recommend it for tactical players. There are some lines where white can make a draw with a perpetual check or with a 3 folds repetition. But if so, your opponent has to learn about 20, 25 or even 30 moves, which is almost impossible. So, for example, in this position, what are typical ways to play? Knight c3, of course, after which I suggest to play knight f6, and then, let's say, bishop e3. This is the most popular move here. Bishop b4. So, in the course, I cover queen d2, queen d2 with castling earlier, queen d2 with f4 after that, and queen f3. If speaking about this position, I analyze knight b5, d6, and if bishop f4, e5, you play something similar to Sveshnikov variation, but at the same time, while there is no knight on f6, it's a slightly different position, and comparing to Sveshnikov, here, white loses a tempo on bishop e3, and if you then play knight f6, they play bishop g5, it's a tempo loss. So this is the main advantage comparing to Sveshnikov. If they play knight b5, knight c6 is also a popular move, b takes c6 and then d5. This is this is just a good position. So this is what everyone would love to play, I'm sure. For example, this position, this is what I would play against almost everyone. Okay, so do you want me to show some concrete lines here, like type of the positions that you're going to achieve? If yes, I can demonstrate. Please let me know. If you are interested, before we start the webinar, I can show it. Okay, fine. Let's start. So, for example, this line, a6, then, sorry, not a6, knight c6, of course, this is Poulsen variation, then knight c3, knight f6, bishop e3, bishop b4, queen f3, and after queen f3, you have to play knight e5 right away. Oh, wait, guys, I'm missing something. Yeah, so first of all, here knight c3, queen c7 first, then they play bishop e3. Oh, of course, knight f6 is just a different variation. If you play knight f6 here, they can capture, you take, they play e5, and knight e4. This is not Paulson, it's a different variation, so I'm not covering it in the course. Here, queen c7 first, bishop e3, and in this position, bishop b4. So queen f3, in my opinion, is the strongest move. And then the lines are really weird. For example, knight e5, queen comes to g3, now this is the pin, and you play h5. I'm sorry. So it's a kind of a mess in my head. So once again, in this position, when you play knight c6, knight c3, here queen c7, bishop e3, a6 first, and after queen f3 move, there is no need to play bishop b4 anymore. So knight e5, queen g3, g7 is not hanging, because if it was, then bishop b4 would be just a tempo loss. So queen is on g3, h5 here. Here, for example, they can continue with bishop f4. You have to play d6 and bishop g5, the most solid move for white in this position. So you continue with this, and after white plays f4, h4, sacrificing the pawn. Bishop takes on h4, and if not, then they just are under the pressure and they have to move with the queen one more time. So bishop h4, of course. And in this position, you continue with b4. What then? For example, if knight b1, you can simply continue with queen a7 attacking the queen. But if knight cb5, which is possible because this knight is also hanging, you have to accept it. And after f takes e5, you have to play bishop d7. No, actually, this is not the sharpest line I wanted to show you. There is something else that I wanted to cover. Just let me check which line I wanted to suggest. No, this one is actually good as well. So what can be played after castle, queenside, and in this position you have to play queen c5 to secure your position. If in this position, let's say you play rook a2, which is quite attractive, then after knight b3 you may experience serious problems because the rook is not going there. So, and here, for example, the best move is rook h4, queen h4, and then d takes e5. So you play without the exchange, but at the same time the position is quite sharp. Actually, it's not the line that I wanted to demonstrate. Let me show another one. Yeah, just a sec. Okay, so here knight c3, queen c7, bishop e3, you play a6, queen e3, knight e5, queen g3, h5, and if they play f4 right away, You have to pressure them. Now queen goes there, knight comes to c4. Of course, bishop c4, queen takes c4. Then they castle, and you start the queenside attack with b5, but f5. So e5 has to be played first. Rook h2. Wait, no. Not e5 right away, but bishop b7 first, and after rook h2 f1, then e5, attacking this knight. This knight goes to b3 with knight a5 idea. Queen comes to c7, bishop g5. After bishop g5, you probably play rook c8, and here they may play f6 to stop your pieces from development. So knight takes, bishop takes, g takes f6, rook takes on f6, and after that you can play b4. Can you guess the move that white can play right now? It's a kind of a tactical strike. Who knows? Okay, I think the Okay, while you're thinking, I'm going to do something to speed up my computer. Okay, fine. No, it's not rook d7, but rook d7 is definitely what you should analyze as well. It's rook f7. No, rook d7 right now doesn't work, just queen takes d7. And if you exchange the queens, then after rook f7 they can just simply block with the bishop. But it's rook f7, because if king f7, rook d7 is quite annoying actually. And here you can take on c3. They, for example, capture with this rook, but it's fine. Take there, they have to take. Take with the queen, they have to go there. And in this position you have to secure the e6 square, and you can do it with this move. Something like that is a blunder, because you checkmate queen c2, queen d1, rook c2. So they probably has to retreat. And after that you have two options. You can play bishop c8, attacking the queen. Or you just can capture on f7, and this is where they can force a draw with a perpetual check. For example, king to g8 and queen e6. Queen e6, king goes there. Queen e5, oh, king f7, for example. Oh, it's not hanging here. So instead, they have to continue with the perpetual check, like queen e6, king goes to f7, queen f5, and so on. If, for example, instead the other rook takes on d7, then still b takes c3, king takes there, queen c2. Now it's not a mate, and you are not even threatening with a mate. Here you can use this rook to secure the e6 square. And after queen e5, I think it's black who has to draw the game with a perpetual check. So the lines are sharp, but this is already move number 24. Okay, fine. So these are the lines that I'm going to cover in the course. I almost finished it, just two more sections left, and I'm planning to finish tomorrow. However, after that, I still need 1 week to edit everything, but next week I'm sure I'll be ready with the course. Okay, fine. Let's now get back to our topic today, and we are going to start with the game between Anatoly Karpov versus John Timon. So, why do we maneuver? Why do we have to maneuver in equal positions? When we try to relocate our pieces, our task is to achieve three different goals. So first of all, by making the moves, you should locate your pieces to the optimal positions, grab the space, and the space is quite important in a chess game. It offers a strong advantage and the domination in the game, and your opponent is likely to make a mistake and lose the game if he plays without a space. Then you can create weaknesses into the enemy camp. So one of the ideas is to grab space, the other one is to create weaknesses into the enemy camp which you can later attack, and the third goal is just to do some prophylaxis in order to improve pieces or to disrupt enemy plans. Okay, so in this game Anatoly Karpov successfully played it. e4, e5, the opening doesn't matter, it's just an example. Queen e2 was played, and actually there is no advantage after queen e2. Queen e7, d3, knight f6, and black just exchanges the queens, it's equal. Knight c3, c6 to control d5 and b5. Castle, queen side, knight comes to a6 with the idea to get to either c5 or c7. Knight d4, but knight c7, and finally black decided to exchange the knights through e6. Knight e6, bishop e6. The pawn structure is symmetrical, the position is calm, and I think many grandmasters would agree to a draw in this position. However, what to do if you are still playing for a win? If so, you should come up with a plan and at least find a way how to improve your own position. What are your suggestions, guys? No, your suggestions, I'm asking for a plan for black, of course, because we analyzed the game for black. Okay, so castle short, throw the f pawn, supporting it is with rook f8, castle queenside, h6 for black. D5 to avoid knight e4. Well, no, some of these plans make sense, but no, first of all, d5 should be played, that's right, to avoid knight e4. No, white played f4 in this position, black continued with d5, but with you see here black doesn't have any space, and one of their ideas is to exchange the bishops and maybe improve the knight. As for the king, in the endgame there is no need to castle, they may just keep the king in the center on d8 or d7. Yeah, it was white to move, white played f4. So castling is not obligatory, and even is an inaccuracy because the king will be too far from the center. So d5 should be played, and then your task is to exchange pieces to grab more space. So this is what successfully what Karpov did. Bishop f3, king d8, knight e2, they are also trying to remaneuver, rook e8, knight g3 threatening with f5, then g6 as a prophylaxis. This is how move by move they improved. For knight retreated back, bishop d7. Then white decided to open up the position because they decided that the king can be potentially the object of the attack. However, it's fine, but this is where black could apply a tactical strike, but they didn't find it. Can you please find this tactical strike? And no, there is nothing you gain there. Well, at least you improve your position. Can you find a tactical strike that improves your position? Let me check something. My settings. Please let me know if the quality becomes worse. So there will be no stream delay. Okay. Okay, so no, it's not knight g4, but you are very close to it. It's knight to e4. So c4 and knight to e4 in this position. Why knight e4? Well, if they capture with the pawn, then it's trapped. For example, bishop e7, rook e7, d takes e4, d takes e4, the bishop is trapped. And here the bishop is better than the knight because the position becomes more open. That was a kind of advantage that black could achieve. Knight c3, for example, take there, double the pawns, and play with the bishop versus knight. Bishop g5 forcing the exchange. If d takes e4 right away, then bishop g5, f takes g5, and d takes e4. So similar, and in case of knight c3 in this position there is no double pawns, but the pawn on g5 is also the object of the attack. For example, this, and here king c7 to replace the rooks and try to attack here. No, bishop g4 is a blunder. You mean bishop g4 in order to not double the pawns? well, in this position, but this is how you lose the pawn, because they took your pawn on d3, because the knight was sacrificed for a pawn, and then you are just giving up the bishop for free, so you are a pawn down. No, bishop g4 is a bad idea. Anyway, I don't know if Karpan saw this option or just blundered it, but he took on c4 and then followed his plan with knight g8, exchange these bishops and grab some more space. For example, if bishop e7, rook e7, and knight c3 was still okay, the position is still approximately equal, but at least both players understand what to do, especially black. They just need to improve their other rook and try to enter the enemy camp. However, in the game it was knight c3 right away, and now it's actually a very small inaccuracy, but even here black was able to take the advantage of this small inaccuracy. How would you play? Okay, f6. Yeah, thank you. It's f6, not h6, but f6. Because h6 only provokes them to take. It doesn't make sense. Because I just told you that it was better to take and then play knight c3. So they play knight c3 right away. h6 is not a helpful move, but f6 allows you to gain the initiative. Because after bishop h4, you can continue with bishop d6 attacking here. And if they play g3, they trap the bishop on the edge of the board. Well, they played rook e8, then king takes e8, king goes to f7 if needed. And in this position, bishop g3 was better, but in such a case, the bishop is not participating in the game after bishop f5, let's say. So it has to stay and protect on f4. This is the main advantage that black could achieve. But Timon played knight e2, and that was a kind of a small inaccuracy. Now bishop e6, so both bishops are attacking the enemy weaknesses. b3, now bishop f5, so he continues his initiative. I mean, he develops it, threatening with bishop a3, which is almost a checkmate. King goes there, then rook comes to d8 with a temper. For example, a rook d1, bishop a3, king d2, then check there, king e1, bishop b4, and they have to move the king and drop the rook on d1. So king b2 was played to prevent bishop a3. Rook d8 now, so now the rook should enter the second rank. And this is where, once again, white played this, and that was a mistake. They blundered something. Instead, they could play g4. Bishop should retreat to c8, and then bishop e1 to close the diagonal. This is a playable position where black has a small initiative, but actually, if white plays properly, the game is likely to end in a draw. So what's wrong with this move, bishop a2, f2? What's the blunder? Yes. I love my bishop is correct. It's bishop takes f4 in this position. Yeah, and Tim is also correct. Yeah, bishop f4, and if knight f4, rook d2, and you are a pawn up. And your rook is also into the enemy camp. So in the game after bishop f4, they played the g4, bishop f5 check, but they are still down a pawn. King c1, bishop e6. The position now becomes absolutely winning, especially for grandmasters. But for some reason, Timon decided to get the pawn back immediately, and that was his critical mistake. Rook e8, bishop retreats, and just rook a2. So even the rook got activated. Rook e1, king f7, and after just 4 moves, white resigned. For example, bishop e5, f takes e5, h3, knight comes to f6 with the idea of e4. That's why knight c3, but now the rook is quite active. It goes to h2, attacking there. g5, knight goes back, and h3 is lost. That's the reason why they resigned. It's actually the second extra pawn. So what you may learn from this game, you may learn that you have to come up with a plan. Even if you don't see any ways of how to win your opponent, at least you should come up to such a plan that either grabs space, improves your pieces, and does some prophylaxis for your position. Maybe you're preparing for an open position in future. You activate on your rooks on the files that gonna open soon, or maybe you're just trying to provoke any weaknesses into the enemy camp. Okay, so let me now demonstrate the second game. This is the game between Tigran Petrosyan and Vlastimil Jansa. Another old game. As for the opening, it doesn't matter, but it was something very similar to King's Indian. Lichess, for example, defines it as Indian games. Torre attack. I was wrong, but it's not Torre attack. D takes e5. D takes e5, which is actually not a typical move. I would prefer to castle, maybe play something else, but okay. Castle now, h6, bishop h4. So the opening is over, and the position is approximately equal. Black continues with queen e8. So, what do you think? Now, the idea of this move is to get rid of the pin, and if possible, to exchange dark squared bishops. No, this is a typical maneuver actually when you see that the bishop is bad, but what white should do in this case? You can suggest your moves, or it's better to suggest plans. If you have any ideas, if you can suggest a series of moves that improve white's position, it would be great. So, any ideas of what exactly to play? Queen b3, follow with rook a d1. Well, what else? Queen b3 and what? So they play knight h5 with bishop f6. How does rook ad1 help? No, this is, if you don't know what to do, then you should expand the place of action. So they first played rook e1 to improve the rook and to be able to play either bishop f1 or knight f1. And after that, knight h5, they played a4 to expand the space. This is the goal. Yes, b4 is better than what you suggested, and queen b3 is not required at all, because you are not attacking f7. You can't do anything with it. So a4, this is how white grabs the space on the queen side. Bishop f6, the idea is obvious, but a5. Queen e7. Now white is forced to take, or white forced to play this move, but actually exchanging the bishop for a knight isn't a good idea. So bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and now what else to do? What's your opinion? This is where you have to play a maneuver which allows you to disrupt enemy future plans. Reroute the knight to e3, but why? What the knight does on e3? It actually makes sense, but I want you to explain why. Okay, what other suggestions do you have, guys? a6. A6 is clever. Yeah, a6 can be played actually. It's a good idea. However, maybe I would wait. If the game passes into the endgame, I would definitely play this move. Prevents g4. Yeah, knight e3. Yeah, that makes sense. But you can play better. You can play bishop f1 and relocate the knight to e3 through c4. Why bishop f1? Because their plan is to play knight f4, and I want you to meet this move with g3. When your bishop is already on f1, you can simply cover the h3 square. So what happens in the game? Rook d8. I would play queen c2. In the game, Tigran Petrosyan played queen e2, fall under knight f4, but then played queen e3. g5. And that was a good moment to play g3. Knight comes to g6, then maybe h3 to relocate the knight to g4. Okay, so in the game it was this move and this useless move, and only then white plays g3. And rook e8 was a mistake. Black could make the position closer to approximately equal if they played this, because after knight e1 they could just continue with knight f8, replace the knight, get the knight back to the game, then knight h4 and so on. The position would be quite complicated, and it's not clear of how white should continue. But they played rook e8 and then g3. Knight comes to g6 and h3, with the idea to relocate your knights. One goes to g4, the other one goes to f5. So you see, with h6 g5 pawn moves, they weakened these two light squares, which you can successfully occupy with the knights. If you do that, you can attack on h6, you can pressure the king, so there are a lot of things you can do. Knight df8, knight h2. And to stop knight g4, they have to play this move. Bishop e2 attacking it. And taking on h3 doesn't look good because of bishop h5. And then you can either play g4 and trap the bishop, or if it retreats, just play bishop g4, exchange the bishops, and still continue with knight g4. Here, opening the h file is more in your favor, because you can move the king and join the rook to the attack. Now it's white who is attacking. Bishop h3 wasn't played, instead they continued with h4, but it didn't make much sense. Bishop g4, then king g7. So the best move here was to exchange even such a bad bishop on c8, but to play knight g4 then. However, Petrosian played a kind of a small inaccuracy, moved the knight to f1. Now knight h7, rook comes to d3. To be able to join the attack if needed, because this is a temporary square for the queen. Queen moves out, the knight will occupy it. Bishop e6, bishop takes e6, queen takes e6. No, because if pawn takes, it's just knight g4, and after queen e7, you just double and try to pressure all these weaknesses. So queen takes e6. Knight comes to g4, and in my opinion the most logical move here is queen b3. But before we analyze this option, I can tell you that knight f6 was played, and they just gave up the pawn on g5, but took the one on e4. However, it's already losing position. Let's now go back, and what can you say about this move? How to continue in this case? Knight d2, queen takes b2, rook b1, follow with rook b7. Well, that makes sense. So knight d2, queen b2, and rook b1, queen c2, rook b7. Well, let's say they take f takes, and they may continue with rook a d8. Yeah, actually no, this is what I want you to avoid. You'd better keep more pieces on the board. If you exchange, no, like that, they have a counterplay through the d file. Instead, you can continue with queen d2, protecting here, and at the same time vacating the square for the knight, which then comes to f5. So knight f6 was played in the original game, queen g5, knight a4, but queen h6. And they are already in trouble. So rook a4 was the best move to join the rook with the temper. I can show you. Rook a4, you may say, and what about knight c5? If so, don't worry, knight f3, and if they capture, you gain the queen with knight f6 move. For example, f5, rook c4. So again, queen c4 is a bad idea. If this move is played, it's just queen g6 with a deadly attack. If f takes g4, rook g4, and the game is over because nobody can save the knight on g6. Petrosian didn't find this move. He played just an ordinary rook ad1, knight f6, knight goes to e3 to replace this knight if needed. H takes g3, and that was also inaccuracy because now rook joins the attack. It was played rook ad8, and exchanging is not in white favor, because if they exchange, they weaken the back rank, and at the same time they have fewer pieces to continue the attack. That's why rook e1. Also pressure in e5. So queen f5, and what's your final plan here? What do you think? h4, h5, yeah, that's right, h4. If this move, still h5. Because even if they take, you still have extra material in this case. For example, king g7, h takes g6, king takes there, g takes f7, rook moves, let's say there, and with this move you are able to win. You may say, and what if they just continue king h7? If so, do this, and after they block exchange and finally promote with rook g8. If rook g6 here, I think it's pretty much the same. Just take on e5 and then play rook e7 or rook e8. It's a winning position. In the game, it was rook e6 instead, and after h5, queen f4, and h takes g6, black realized that they are down a minor piece and it's time to resign, especially against such a strong grandmaster as Tigran Petrosian. So what you may learn from this game, the main thing is this maneuver. When you first played bishop f1 to let the knight come to c4 and e3, and the other knight goes to g4. So you should realize which squares are weak into their position and then activate your pieces to be able to occupy them or attack enemy pawn weaknesses. Another important thing, if you don't know what exactly to do, you should expand the space. So, I mean, expand the place of action. a4, e5, and a6 also. If without the queens, I would say that with a6 is the best here, if there are no queens. And the last game I'm going to show is the game among it's one Bilek and Efim Geller. It was a weird opening, which finally transformed to something King's Indian defense. Castle, rook e8, h3, knight bd7, king h2, prophylaxis, a5. So you see a similar idea to expand the space and also to let the bishop escape. E takes d5, c takes d5. Here black controls the center, but white can simply stop any black's counterplay with d4. So now e takes d4, knight comes to b3, the bishop has to move. Another possible move was to play b6, because if they take, you reinforce the d4 with the pawn and you are a pawn up. But bishop b6 was played, knight bd4. Now knight e4, getting the control over the center with the knight. This is a helpful move. c3, knight df6. The position is approximately equal. White continued with bishop f4. And both players almost finished their piece's development. The position is approximately equal. However, your task is to maneuver with your pieces to create weaknesses into the enemy camp. Oh, by the way, before you are trying to find what exactly to do after bishop f4, can you please tell me how to deal with this move, which is actually a blunder? So what's wrong with bishop e3? How can you punish your opponent for this move? Yeah, thanks. It's knight g3. Knight g3. And if f takes g3, it's just a pawn loss. If king takes g3, it's queen d6. And here, after bishop f4, knight h5 gains a piece. If king decides to travel, then you can continue with rook e4, and after this move, it's a checkmate with the h pawn. So bishop f4 was played. And here your task is to remaneuver your pieces. So what can you say about this position? The pawn is on c3, you have an isolated pawn, but your pieces are quite active to compensate it. And it would be great to create a weakness into the enemy camp. And the c3 can be such a weakness if you force the b pawn to move. You can try it with a4, but then a3. Or you can occupy the c4 square with your knight and provoke them to push the pawn. In such a case, your knight retreats, but c3 becomes a permanent weakness. So to be able to do this, you should start with this move first. Bishop d2, bishop d7, bishop e1 to keep attacking on d5. This knight retreats back to support it. a4. And now it's time to occupy. Rook c8. Knight g1 and knight d6, with knight coming to c4. What happened then? Knight improves to e2 and knight c4. Of course, it's not obligatory to play b3 move, but what if not? Does the queen have to stay on c2 somewhere to control it, or what? What else to do to secure the pawn? Maybe rook a2, but this is a weird move, and the knight on c4 is actually good. That's why b3 is actually a logical move here. Knight comes to d6, now c3 is a permanent weakness. Queen d3 was played, knight comes there trying to pressure on c3. However, right now they have enough defenders. So rook d1 was played in the game. And while white has to protect the pawn on c3, it's difficult for them to organize any active play in the center or on the king side. So you see their pieces are really bad while your knight is on e4. And if they play f3, which actually they played, they block the bishop. f3, no, queen e7 was played, f3, knight c5. And now you created another weakness into the enemy camp. No, queen c2 was played. So what do you think? What is your next plan? You create one weakness on one side of the board. What else you should do? Create second weakness on the other side of the board. That's right. And the second weakness here is g3, which you may attack with the h pawn, for example, or with bishop c7, knight h5, and queen g5. Here, Geller preferred the third option. So bishop c7, the second option, sorry, knight h5, bishop f2, queen g5. And it provoked white to play f4. Maybe that wasn't the best move. At least they could try queen d2 or maybe king h2 back. But if king h2 back, then move by move they could improve the position and maybe then try with the h pawn instead. Also, the king on h2 is in a risky position because these two pieces are tied down, and any sacrifice, no, not right now, but maybe something like that would work. So f4, a logical move which also improves the bishop. Queen h6. Bishop d5 means bishop h3. Knight f5 was played. Something like that could be okay because you attack on e2. However, black decided to take, but then played knight e4. Okay, so there is a good question. Why did I pick up the g3 as a weakness, not h3? But how can we attack h3 in this position? So we have only bishop. Even if we move the queen there, then king h2. Another thing to remember is that the weak pawn should be fixed. h3 can move to h4, while g can't move. It creates so many weak squares into their camp, such as f4, g3, especially if the king is there. So that's why g3. Knight e4, what happened then? Bishop e4. Oh, something like that was a blunder due to g6. And after, let's say, this move, just one of the knights goes to f6. Queen d5 was another blunder. Just take there, then take there, and then knight g3. So bishop e4 is the best move, d takes e4, bishop e3, and finally g6. Now white has to exchange the queens. For example, if they move the queen away, you can just simply win the game with knight g3. Then you take this and then the other bishop. So they have to play queen g5, and you are able to gain a weak pawn. c3 is another weakness, and the position becomes winning. Rook d7 is not a big problem, because after rook c3 and the other rook coming to the seventh rank, you can just play bishop e5 and control here. And if they decide to take, they are not threatening with anything, you just take the bishop. That's why they played bishop f4 in this position. However, that was another blunder. For example, bishop, the rook to f3, pinning, and after that, black just gained a minor piece, and then white resigned. Instead of this move, they could try probably this to get some counterplay. Rook a7, rook a7, rook a3, rook a5, rook h3 with a check, king g2, rook b3. But I'm sure you understand that this endgame with two extra pawns is completely winning, especially after this move. Okay, so let's go back. Here, black successfully applied the principle of two weaknesses, but before applying it, they should at least create one weakness, and they realized that c3 could be such a weakness. The only task is to provoke white to play this move, so to play with the b pawn, and the knight on c4 is quite annoying, so white couldn't tolerate this knight. They had to play b3 and weaken the pawn on c3. The knight on e4 was another strong piece which provoked them to play f3, and then black realized that g3 is a weakness. Then it's just a technique. Black successfully took the advantage of two weaknesses. You know, one weakness sometimes is not enough to succeed, but two weaknesses, if you play properly, are usually enough to win. Okay, guys, so that was all I wanted to share with you. I'm going to fix my mailing list and continue sending reminders. Anyway, I kindly recommend you to subscribe to my to send me a friend request on chess.com. So this is my chess.com profile. Send me a friend request not to miss the announcements. And also, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, because I'm also do streaming there as well. Let me find the link. So this is the link for you to subscribe. Okay, guys, so hope to see you next Sunday on my next webinar. Anyway, if there is no reminder, please come anyway. I hope I will conduct the next one. Okay, see you next Sunday, and thank you for coming.